stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker of Elkins Consulting. In my work with coaching clients, I guide people to improve their communication using storytelling as the foundation of our work together. What I've realized over years of coaching and podcasting is that the majority of people don't realize the impact of the stories they share on their own internal messages and on the people they're sharing them with. My work with leaders and people who aspire to be leaders follows a similar path to the interviews on my podcast, uncovering pivotal moments in their lives and learning how to share them to connect more authentically with others, to make their presentations and speaking more engaging, to reveal patterns that have kept them stuck or moved them forward, and to improve their relationships at work and at home. Be sure to keep an eye out for the release of the audiobook version of Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will, to be released in November 2020. As a special bonus for listeners, the book will include 2 songs recorded by my band, Spare Change, in my living room in Montana. Keep an eye out for announcements through LinkedIn and via my Elkins Consulting Facebook and Instagram pages, or visit my website, elkinsconsulting.com, to learn more. Everyone has a story, and I mean everyone. When the guy came to deliver our new washer and dryer, he kept looking at me like he wanted to say something, like he knew me. Instead of just letting it go, I asked him if he grew up here or if he was from somewhere else. Most people around this town aren't from here. He said he was from Northern Virginia, so I asked where he went to school. That's when his eyes lit up. "You were my teacher. I knew you looked familiar, but I couldn't place you." I couldn't believe it, Sarah. I was so happy as a flood of memories came back to me. He was such a sweet kid. Of course I remembered him. "Yes, Ryan, now I recognize you. You're not the little boy I taught anymore. How's your sister?" We had a wonderful conversation and caught up. He told me about his sister. I remembered she was having some reading problems because of an eye condition. And then he told me the story of how he ended up here. It was one of at least a dozen stories like it that my aunt, my father's sister, told me when she visited. Each of her stories would start with something like, "When we moved and needed to, we met the nicest person." My uncle, who is far less exuberantly friendly, would shake his head with a small smile on his face. He'd mumble, "You always say that." Having my aunt around was a welcomed reminder of my father. Until this visit, I never realized how similar they were. And now that my dad is gone, having her around gives me a sense of his presence and keeps his memory just a little closer. It was an awesome visit. We took long hikes together, took time to explore this little town, and ate outside, constantly sharing stories. It wasn't until after they left that I started to think about the way my aunt would tell a story of a contractor, delivery person, or someone else they met when they moved from Virginia to Arizona. My uncle was right. My aunt always had a story to share about the people she met, what they had in common, something interesting the person shared, the kindness they showed toward her and my uncle. Almost every story ended with, "They were so nice." It's months later, and those stories are still with me. I realized that she almost always has these stories of people she meets when we have our marathon phone calls. It's not that she's a magnet for interesting, kind people. It's because she is interested and kind that nearly everyone she meets demonstrates those qualities. People are interesting to her because she demonstrates curiosity and care when she asks questions. People are kind to her because of her kind, open nature. She expresses curiosity instead of judgment when someone does something she wouldn't do. And when she tells stories about them from a place of observation and thoughtfulness, she changes the story for the listener. Our major kitchen remodel began a couple of months ago when I reached out to our local bank to ask about financing rates. I went straight to the broker who served us 3 years ago. I had done a little research to find out typical current interest rates, but I didn't bother applying through anyone else. We had a relationship. I knew I could trust her, that she would do her very best to get me the best rate, and that she would have everything in place for the closing, which means less stress for me and my husband. She has great stories to share about her son, who is a musician, and the funny things that happened when she and her husband started a similar project. The company I reached out to for the electrical work is owned by a couple I met while kayaking on the Missouri River. When I called, the woman I met was grateful that I remembered them, and though they're swamped right now like all the other good contractors around here, she said she would fit our project into the schedule. The evening after I met the electrician they sent to do the work, I was telling my husband how kind he is, that he has a degree in something related to wildlife biology from the University of Montana, and that he spent the last many years living on an Indian reservation where he went to become a certified electrician. I told my husband about his daughters, and that he was thrilled to be invited to take a bag full of apples from our trees so he and his youngest could use their new dehydrator as an evening activity, their quality time. That evening, as I spoke to my husband about the electrician and mentioned how kind and interesting he was, I saw the same small smile cross my husband's face that I saw on my uncle's face when my aunt would tell a story. He didn't have to say anything. The smile said, "You always say that." You won't be surprised to hear that I've had many stories since then about the people working with me on this huge project. I'm acting as general contractor, and all of the service providers have had to be patient with me as I figure things out. From the woman at the city who's handling the permit process, the plumber who showed up at very short notice to disconnect and cap the gas line to the stove so our movers could get it into the truck, the contractor designing and building the cabinets who made a gorgeous turned bowl from one of the 100-year-old fir wood beams removed from our ceiling, to the movers and insulation teams who worked with us in those first 2 days of the project. Every story begins or ends with, "They were so interesting," or patient, or understanding, and kind. Every time I walk away from one of the people providing our services, I think, I'm so lucky to be having these positive experiences. I know they're all so busy and fitting us in despite their crazy schedules. We're behind schedule and have found some unexpected issues, and everyone has worked together to do their best to get us back into our kitchen. Last night, as I finished getting ready for bed, I looked in the mirror and smiled when I saw my father and my aunt looking back at me. Everything suddenly made sense. People are interesting when you ask the right questions. Every person has a story to tell. And when we listen, when we really listen, the best of who they are is revealed. Thank you for listening to this episode of Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. The book of the same title is now available, and the audiobook version will be released in November 2020. If you're ready to uncover your stories and learn to uncover the stories of the people around you to create stronger connections and healthier communities, visit elkinsconsulting.com. And while you're visiting the website, you can learn more about the book and the work we do to improve communication among teams and through our one-to-one coaching. Thank you.
Now listen to me, honey, while I say, how could you tell me that you're going